10x is easier than growing incrementally.
100%, yes. We grew the business from £1 million in turnover to £28 million in 3 years using M&A.
Why do you think most entrepreneurs struggle with the idea of thinking that they can grow that fast?
I think a lot of them don't think that the world of M&A is available to them.
And that's because they're still in the operator mindset. They're not in the owner mindset.
Yeah.
How do you think AI is going to affect the M&A world?
When a disruptive technology comes along, you get wiped out by it.
You've come up with a really great framework.
Yep.
The FACE methodology, right?
Yep. That is where every M&A transaction either succeeds or falls over.
If you're going to play this game and use this strategy, I think you want to think about building a deal team.
Oh, 100%.
One of the mistakes I've seen people make is trying to...
And people don't often think about that. You need an accountant who understands that world. You need a lawyer who understands that world because...
Yeah.
And every business has three legs. They need to find and win customers. That's called sales and marketing.
Yep.
They need to deliver whatever it is they do to customers. That's called operations. And they need to manage money coming in and going out, and that's called finance. You need to have in your team very strong people leading strong departments.
All right, so excited for today's conversation, excited for the podcast today. I'm joined by David B. Horne, the founder of Add Then Multiply, a consultancy business that helps founders to scale, specifically through M&A and funding strategies, which I think right now is so topical. You've raised over £110 million, done 30 company acquisitions and exits, some of which are pretty epic, and they're in your book, the Add Then Multiply, which we'll talk about. You come from a really interesting kind of corporate background, which is really fascinating, I think. And your kind of whole view and point of view on the world is to help entrepreneurs 10x what they're doing.
Correct.
Rather than taking 20 years to grow their business, do it in 3, essentially.
Correct.
Right?
Absolutely.
Okay. You're also a TEDx speaker.
Yes.
Congratulations. With your Fight for Fairer Funding TEDx, which we'll drop a link below in the comments, getting over 3 million views. So where did you do that in the world, out of interest?
I did it here in London. It was it was the inaugural TEDx PCL from Pearson College, London.
Cool.
And it was filmed during lockdown.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So no audience?
Just the other speakers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
How amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was a bit weird, but yeah.
Yeah. But still done, though. So
still done.
Congratulations, right?
Thank you. Yeah.
And before we started talking, we were talking about biohacking and what you had for breakfast. So we might get to that as well, possibly, right? We might get to that. Okay. So I wanted to jump in. There's a couple of things that struck me with your book when I was reading them, by the way. But I wanted to start by asking a question, because you kick off in the book with this whole idea that, look, you've got to shift your mindset to realize that 10x is easier than growing incrementally, right?
Yep.
So growing 25% a year or whatever, you can just do it so much quicker, right?
Yes.
So let's just talk about that. Why do you think, in your experience, most entrepreneurs struggle with the idea of thinking like that they can grow that fast? Why do you think they struggle with it, first of all?
I think a lot of them don't think that the world of M&A is available to them. They think that that's something that, the big corporate businesses and FTSE 100 companies and all of that do, and they don't think that actually, if you're running a hairdressing business, you can buy hairdressers in other towns and things like that and use that to scale.
Do you think? My perspective is, I think quite often that's because they're still in the operator mindset. They're not in the owner mindset.
Exactly.
I think they're trapped in the idea that I run the business rather than I grow the business.
Exactly.
I would suggest. Is that your experience too?
That's my experience too. But for a lot of them, it's one of those, what was it Donald Rumsfeld said, the unknown unknowns?
Yes, true. Yeah. Well, you don't know what you don't know, right?
Exactly.
But I think there's a fundamental, because you say in your book, your first chapter is you have to shift how you think.
Correct.
Before you can even consider playing, because it's a different game, isn't it?
It is a very different game.
Yeah.
It's a very different game, yeah.
And just talk us, let's just go back. I thought it was really interesting. You and I both shared a really interesting start to our entire commercial career, which is we were both paper boys.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool.
And I was still doing mine at the age of, I think it was 17 or 18 or something. And just before I was taking my A-levels, I was still doing it crazily.
So was I until I met my wife, and she convinced me that it really wasn't necessary anymore, because I also had a job during the day.
I think so. What did you learn from that? What was it like? Because I learned loads from that, by the way. But what did you learn from that?
Well, I mean, in Canada, it's slightly different, because not only did you have the responsibility of delivering the papers, but you had the responsibility of collecting the money from your customers.
Yeah, I did too.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah, I had a kind of evening paper round where I used to go and deliver a a certain newspaper and people have to pay for it.
Yeah.
And they were either paid for it on the night, which obviously you're asking for cash back then,
Right.
or they'd pay a month in advance, which is always a lot easier. If you could get someone to pay a month in advance, then you didn't have to worry about doing it every time you went, which was a lot easier.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought that was for me, that was a really interesting lesson in being able to sort of very quickly persuade people to give you money in the middle of what was obviously a very hectic house that night.
Yes, absolutely.
For something they almost forgotten they subscribed to.
Yep. No, absolutely. I mean, I think the key lessons that I learned, number one was learning to deal with money and to be comfortable about asking customers for money.
Yeah.
Number two was all about customer service.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting because I remember, going around my newspaper round, and I mean, I had some little old ladies on my round, and they were saying to me things like, "Oh, well, I find it really difficult to bend over and pick up the newspaper." So instead of chucking the newspaper up onto their porch, I would walk up the steps and put it on, in the little slot that they had for the newspaper.
Yeah.
Well, all of a sudden, every month went around, oh, well, here's an extra $5 tip.
Yes.
Because I was making their lives easier.
Yes. I think, yeah, you're so right. I remember I think at Christmas, we used to give everyone Christmas cards. I used to do that, and I remember getting some pretty chunky Christmas tips. And even there were a couple of people who, when they didn't have the money, I'd sub them for a couple of weeks. I mean, it wasn't very much, but I'd just go, well, okay, I'll cover it this week, but you give me it next week when I'm here, and then they would normally just give you and then a load extra on top of it, right? Which was kind of a nice experience.
Yeah.
So there you go. See, I think it's a grounding as well in dealing with different types of human beings.
Very much.
Like I learned anyway a lot about you walk up to a house and you would prejudge who was inside based on the outside of the house.
Yeah.
And then you'd meet completely different people from all walks of life it was just a really interesting introduction into that kind of, the vast array of humanity that is out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it was a great experience and yeah.
So talk us through your just give us the commercial highlights before I want to talk about sort of your approach now and specifically how people listening to this show can really kind of access funding. Because I think one of the biggest things that people struggle with, and I've been doing, I've helping entrepreneurs scale for 21 years, and funding growth is one of the biggest. There are two massive headaches. One is funding growth.
Yep.
Two is building a team.
Yep.
I think those two headaches are two of the biggest headaches.
Yep. And a subset of building a team is letting go.
Yes.
Because you can build a team, and I've gone into companies. We acquired a business when I was at the auction company that's referred to a little bit in that book. But we had acquired this operation in the United States that was run by the two sons of the dad who'd founded it. The dad was gone, and the two sons were in their mid to late 50s. And it was a very successful business, but we very quickly discovered that basically Bill and Dave made all the decisions, and everybody else did what they were told to do.
Yeah.
So there wasn't really, there wasn't. It was a good enough business, but if Bill and Dave weren't there, nothing happened.
I think they call it key man dependent, don't they? Or
something like that, yeah.
Kind of, if you're looking at the 6 things that create value in an enterprise, if it's key man dependent on only one person, if all the decisions have to go through that one person, then obviously it's massively at risk. And
absolutely.
Somebody I worked with a couple of years ago had exactly that experience where they bought a business that was relatively small, sort of 500, 600K, but it was very key person dependent.
Right.
And I warned them at the time. I said, listen, a single point of failure is a really huge risk, and you need to deal with it. And they were like, it's fine. I mean, no, nothing's going to go. Entrepreneurs love to sort of hey, it'll be all right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sadly, that person had a heart attack about 18 months later, died. Wow. And not only did they took all the intellectual property with them, they took all the contacts, but also everyone had lost the ability to solve and think about things for themselves. So they just had nowhere to go. So now the person who bought this business was having to get in and get very tactical on a business that was
exactly
2 hours plus away from where they lived.
Yeah.
And you go, that was something that you have to kind of plan for that worst case, don't you? Don't you think? Just in what if a key person was to leave? What if a key person was to die?
Absolutely.
What's my strategy for handling?
Absolutely. And that's the C. C is for consolidate.
We'll come back to your frame. We'll come back to that.
Yeah.
Frame. So just walk us through the highlights, because you've done some pretty epic deals, both internationally. Obviously, you started your career in Canada.
Yep.
So just walk us through that.
Sure. So I was born and raised on the west coast of Canada, Vancouver. Trained as a chartered accountant with PwC. It was Price Waterhouse back then. Moved with the firm to Zurich, Switzerland.
Okay.
and spent 2 years with them in Zurich. And then my biggest client, which was the Swiss subsidiary of a big US tech company, gave me the proverbial job offer you can't refuse. And at the ripe old age of 27, I was the number 2 finance guy in the Swiss subsidiary of NCR, a big hardware technology company that turned over $500 million in Switzerland.
Wow.
So that was wow. I was in the right place at the right time with the right skills. So that was that was the first kind of real, vertical takeoff of my career. And I carried on in that role for 4 years. And our kids were born in Switzerland at the time. My wife has family in the UK. And as the girls were getting a little older, she thought, let's move to the UK where I've got family. And I was able to organize a transfer with the company to London.
Nice.
During that time, NCR had been bought by AT&T, the US telecoms giant. And I ended up being 2 years with NCR and then 2 years with an AT&T division. And then the division I was with that got sold by AT&T, and I moved on to the BBC. But that was kind of the beginning of understanding.
That's a bit of a culture shock.
Yeah,
wasn't
it was.
I mean, going from that to the BBC, I would have thought it's like...
Oh, that was a total culture shock. It was. What was really fascinating was, and I remember this so clearly back in the day when, the finance director jobs were in the FT on a Thursday. And I remember opening up...
Financial Times, for anyone who isn't in the UK,
yes,
right?
The Financial Times.
We were talking
exactly.
about.
And I remember opening it up and there was this full-width job advert for a role in BBC Resources, which is the facilities side, so studios, post-production, outside broadcast, all that. And it was a new department and a new role. And I remember the closing line was, the job is there to be defined. And I thought, wow, that sounds really cool. So I applied for it and I got it. But yeah, within about 18 months, I realized just how political the BBC was. And when the guy who was the main backer of our division left, all of a sudden it just all started to unravel. And I spent the next 6 months engineering my redundancy. That was the end of 99. And I left thinking I would get a job with the .com. And thankfully I didn't, because that whole thing was about to unfold rather
yeah, I went on that ride. I had a .com business that I was involved with that went very big and then very, very wrong and splashed pretty spectacularly. Right. So yeah, you missed it. It was an interesting.
I'm sure it was a lot of
years.
Fun.
I mean, fun isn't the word I would necessarily have used to describe it, but I think there's a lot. We were talking about this before. I think there's a lot of similarities with that point in history and what's happening with AI at the minute.
Yes.
I think there's a lot of, like, for me, I see a lot of same kind of energy, same kind of vibe, same kind of excitement, and also the same kind of hype and complete BS about loads of stuff that is not remotely investable.
And money flying into
everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, but I think if you can identify the companies that are going to be the next Amazon in that space and things like that, there will be $100 billion businesses that come out of this.
Yeah.
But I do think it's interesting. I'm just going to ask you this now, because how do you think AI is going to affect the M&A world? What's your take on that? Because I think before we talk about your framework, I'm just interested in, how does it affect when you're looking at buying a business to think, how do you think about, should you be thinking about how you can automate what you're going to buy? Or
I think you have to look at how you can automate and how you can use AI. And if you're a clever seller, you start doing that already, and you weave AI into your name, and all of a sudden your valuation goes up.
Yeah.
But I think like anything, when a disruptive technology comes along, you either ride the wave or you get wiped out by it.
True.
And you're going to ride the wave, and sometimes you're going to ride well, and sometimes you're going to crash, but you got to get up again and ride it again.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's what happens in any kind of big technological change.
I think it's really interesting, because I think the people who can or are embracing it at the moment are suddenly realizing it's a massive leverage tool, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it realistically is, a massive leverage
Absolutely.
tool.
It just makes things so much faster.
Yep.
And there are so many applications where it can be used to just simplify things. I've been working with some people on using AI as a coach. And it's really interesting. So I get these messages for, I tell ChatGPT, I want you to think like this, and and here's who I am, etc. And of course it learns and it gets to know you.
Yeah.
And so some of the stuff that comes out of that's quite good. I also have a human coach.
Yes.
But
you should have both.
Yeah, exactly.
It's funny actually because I'm obviously you and I know each other through Daniel Priestley, KPI fame, and various things like that. In terms of a couple of the businesses that I'm invested in with him, Score App being one.
Yep.
And I thought it's really funny. I had a client of mine the other day said he sent me the prompt actually that he used. He said, imagine you're sitting in a room with Paul Avers and Daniel Priestley, and you ask them the following question. What would they both answer? And I was like, okay, this is getting a bit interesting and a bit weird all at the same time. It's like you're having virtual conversations with me and Daniel. I was like,
exactly.
All right, okay, this is it. But I think that's an interesting. There's a whole interesting different discussion about where that goes.
Yes.
But I do think if you're not looking at using it, if you're not using it as an accelerator to increase your margins or accelerate your growth, you're not going to get out because somebody who is going to beat you to the punchline, right?
Correct.
Without question.
Correct.
Without
Absolutely.
question.
Absolutely. And AI still hallucinates, and you can't believe everything that it says.
No.
But if you're using the tool,
that would be true for everywhere, right?
Exactly. But if you're using the tool and applying your own intelligence to it, it speeds things up. It lets you think of things that you might not have thought of. I have almost replaced Google with ChatGPT now when I'm searching for things.
I'm so glad you brought that up because this happened for the first time to a client of mine last week where I was with her on Friday and she said, you're not going to believe what just happened. I said, what? She said, I've just had a phone call from somebody who said, I went to ChatGPT and asked them who were the two top experts in this particular subject matter, this field. And it came out with a big American software company and her.
Oh, wow.
Her company and said, you should talk to either these guys in America, a massive company, or this company in the UK, and this is the CEO. And she was like, and then the guy rang him and said, basically, ChatGPT said I should talk to you. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting because if people are starting to ask it who to go to as a supplier, suddenly you've got whole lead generation strategies, SEO, pay-per-click and stuff like that, that whilst they're still relevant now are going to become less relevant if you're not careful in the very near future.
Absolutely.
Right?
And it's going to become all about content and who's putting out the relevant content. And
I think it's about content, but I also think it's about connections.
Yes.
Because I think content on its own, interesting, yes, but if you punch out a load of content and it's crap, let's be honest, nobody's going to watch it.
No.
Point number one. Point number two is if you're not building your network off the back of the content, if you're not using the content to leverage relationships and then invest in the human side of that,
yep.
If you're not, building your network, I'm a big fan on LinkedIn. I think it's a massive opportunity that still most people are not paying attention to.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the content is one piece. I think that whole kind of published piece is definitely true. But I also think there is a big part about build a connection and create a community of your own, right? Some kind of community. I think it's content, connection, and community. And if you do those three things, you're going to generate cash, right? Those three kind of going to lead to it. But but I think I just thought it was really interesting that she'd got her first qualified lead.
I think it's brilliant.
And he basically
ChatGPT.
From ChatGPT. And she was like, how does ChatGPT know that I'm the person to how? And I was like, I have no idea, but I'm going to guess it's because you posted a lot of content online and you've also shared a lot of your own stuff with ChatGPT. So it's actually learned that you're quite good at this, or I don't know. I mean,
and then when does OpenAI decide how do we monetize this?
I don't know.
And then it becomes,
if you're Google, you must be sat there just thinking your business model is in real trouble, right? I mean, I know we're off topic a bit, but I mean, I think there's a really interesting point here, which is, I say this quite a lot, and I'm interested your take on this. I think one of the lies that entrepreneurs tell themselves is that they can stay in the business forever and there's always going to be somebody who wants to buy it. Like I can keep this business forever and then sell it at the end of my life, right?
For gazillions.
Yeah, I will. Right. And I've always said, well, you're always going to leave your business, but it's usually for one of two reasons. Either you're going to get disrupted by technology or something that wipes you out, or you manage to set up for an exit of some kind and you're in control of that exit. But you will leave the business. It's like you're not in it forever.
No. And if you don't actively pursue that kind of an exit strategy, you'll end up selling your business for a pittance.
If you can, right? What were the numbers? 18% of businesses that go up for sale in the UK actually get sold. I think it's tiny. I might be off on the numbers, but it's about, I think, 18%. And which is a really small number.
Absolutely.
When you consider how many go up for sale every year.
Yep.
Or how many get sold the dream of being put up for sale and sold, I think is probably a better way to put it. But I do think that's kind of interesting. So let's get back to kind of the M&A side of things and kind of your journey. And I want to unpack some of the things. So like, talk to me about how you have raised over 110. Let's do that kind of question. Like, what's the story behind that, and how have you got to that level?
The biggest chunk of that came when I was the chief financial officer of two companies that were listed on AIM, which is London's alternative investment market.
Okay,
so I was the CFO of public companies, and we were acquisitive companies.
Right.
So the first one was a company called Huvo PLC, and it's
in the book. Yeah,
in the book. I go through literally all 8 acquisitions that we did. So we grew the business from £1 million in turnover to £28 million in turnover in 3 years. So we tripled year on year
using
for 3 years using M&A.
Yeah.
So we acquired 7 privately held companies, and we took over another listed company.
Yeah.
And
was that the one in France?
No, the ones in France were private.
Okay.
The one in the public company that we acquired was an e-learning business called Epic. They were based down in Brighton.
Okay. So the bit that I just wanted to ask you about in the book, and obviously if you haven't grabbed a copy of Add Then Multiply, I think you have a way that people can get a free copy, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll drop a link to that below in the comments and the resources section and stuff. So there is you very kindly, people pay the postage and packaging, they can get the book, right? There's a bit in there that I thought was really interesting, and I wanted to unpack it with you, which is you did a deal where you bought a company in France that had made losses but couldn't use them, right?
Yeah. So
can you explain this? Because I thought this was, I've heard people buy businesses for no money down. We've got a number of our own clients who've done it. We've got a couple of clients now who've used M&As to scale to 20 million. But I don't think I've seen anybody or heard of anybody yet who's bought a business that's got losses they could transfer. Can you just unpack that? Because I was like,
sure.
How did that work?
So if you take it and go back to the dot-com boom days,
right?
And at the time, France Telecom was buying up anything that seemed vaguely internet related, and France Telecom acquired this medical publishing business called ATP Agora that was founded by a man called Alain Trebuch. So
right.
AT. I can't remember what.
Isn't Agora an American firm? Agora Publishing is
this one's different, so
okay.
It was independent. So anyway, yeah, so he set up this publishing business, and France Telecom bought it in I think 1998 or 99. And anyone who's worked in a big corporate knows that all of a sudden they put in recharges and cost allocations and all this kind of stuff, and ended up racking up huge losses inside this company. But they were France Telecom is a telecoms business, and this was a publishing business, and they didn't have publishing gains to offset against the publishing losses.
Right.
So they just sat there with these publishing losses. But the whole story of this acquisition is quite special, because what we agreed when we negotiated the deal was that we would buy it on a debt-free, cash-free basis.
Right. And
that they would clean out all of the intercompany positions so that it was all clean. And so I remember getting on board Eurostar one morning going over to Paris, and I had a check in my pocket, like a banker's draft, for 500,000 euros, which was the agreed purchase price. And so we went in, and I handed the guys from France Telecom the check, and they handed me the shares. It was all very old-fashioned. And then we shook hands, and I went up to the office, and I sat down with the MD and the financial controller, and I said, can I see the bank statement, please? France Telecom had forgotten to take the cash out of the business. There was 513,000 euros in the business.
I love
so
it.
In effect, we got the business for free.
Yeah.
And 13,000 euros. And France Telecom had racked up about 2 million euros of tax losses in the business.
Right.
We were able to restructure this company with our other French publishing operations and get a tax benefit for all of the losses that had been racked up by France Telecom that they hadn't placed any value on.
Wow.
Now, in the grander scheme of things at France Telecom, this little business would have been a rounding difference.
Yep.
So, we didn't worry about it. We just thought, okay, well, they made a mistake and we'll profit from it.
Wow. So you walked away with the money in the bank.
Walked away with the money in the, yeah.
13 grand extra.
13 grand extra, a free business. And about 600,000 euros worth of cash tax benefits.
Nice.
Yeah. I think that deal added like 15p to earnings per share that year.
Did it really?
Yeah.
That's the definition of a good deal.
That is the best deal I have ever done. Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to take some beating, right? Wow. That is yeah. But I think there's an interesting point in there, isn't there? Which I think when you deal with bigger companies as a smaller company, you tend to have an assumption, or I've seen it anywhere, where you assume because they're bigger, they're better, or they're smarter, or they're more on top of stuff. And in my experience, it's just not the case.
Yeah.
I had a client recently bought, a company was nearly 3 times the size of them, which is an interesting mindset shifting yourself
Absolutely.
to go, they're our biggest competitor, but we could buy them actually.
Yep.
And but what they found out afterwards was they internally they were a mess. They weren't anywhere near as well structured. They weren't the systems weren't there. The buying systems weren't there. And I think that's an interesting kind of limiting belief that a lot of entrepreneurs have to get over, is the fact that just because someone's bigger doesn't mean they run it any better at all. And 9 times out of 10, they're more dysfunctional and more disorganized the bigger they've got, right?
Yep. I mean, I spent the first 25 years of my career in corporates and medium-sized listed companies and stuff. And you find some companies and they're phenomenally well run, and you find others and they're changing chief executive every 2 years, and then the strategy changes and a new chief executive comes in and wants to bring his or her team on, and it's mayhem. It can be mayhem. The best run big businesses are ones that have stability at the top. And
which is rare though in corporate world,
rare,
right?
It
in
is
corporate
rare.
world, it's really, really rare.
Yeah. Like 2 to 3 years now.
The average life cycle is 18 to 24 months for a new CEO. That's how long they get. But if they aren't seen to be delivering greater shareholder value or greater returns at that point, they genuinely don't last long. So that they go in and have to tear everything up because they know they've got probably 2 years max to get it done, or they're out of a job.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting because they're operating with such a short time frame. They're not which I think is one of the opportunities for entrepreneurs to be more strategic and go, look, we could buy this. If it takes 5 years to get the return back on it, we're okay with that. We don't have to get it done in 2.
Yeah.
We can play a longer game so you can look at different deals, right?
Especially if you've arranged your funding in a way like that.
So let's talk about that. That's a great segue into the framework. So you've, as a result of doing all of this, and how many people have you helped buy businesses, do you think now, probably?
About a dozen.
Right.
Buy or sell.
So during that process, you've come up with a really great framework. So let's talk about it. So the FACE methodology, right?
Yep.
So just walk us through that, and then let's delve into it in a bit more depth and sort of unpack some of this, if that's all right.
Yep. So FACE stands for fund, acquire, consolidate, and exit.
Right. So so that's interesting. So you suggest that people should get the funding first.
What often happens, Paul, is that the funding comes at the same time as the deal comes. But where my methodology is different from a lot of people who are out there who say, oh, you can buy companies for no money, etc., is I say, no, look for good companies.
Yes, I agree.
Don't be afraid. I'm a massive Warren Buffett fan, and one of my favorite Warren Buffett quotes is, it is far better to buy a wonderful company at a fair price than a fair company at a wonderful price.
Great.
And, most of those companies that are out there for no money down, it's a basket case, and the owner is desperate to get out. It's
for a reason.
Yeah, totally.
For a reason.
Exactly. And, if you're a turnaround specialist, or if you know the industry inside out, go for it.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, that's a really, really risky approach to take. And my approach is much more, go out and find a really, really good business, and work to make that business and your business together better.
Yeah, and I think what I like about that is I'm a big sort of believer in the fact that if you've got a really good business, adding acquisitions on is a really great way to scale
Absolutely.
it. I can give you 2 or 3 examples of clients who've done that in the last 2 or 3 years. But we were able to do it because we had a core team, we had a core system, and we had a really good core business at the heart of it all,
right? Which
was already profitable, already successful. So then adding on bolt-ons made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
All the sense in the world, right?
Yep.
However, I think I kind of call it the new property sort of seminar boom type thing, where people going, hey, look, you can be no money down, buy property all the time, which was the rage 10 years ago, and which fine. But I think though that market's much harder to do that in now, given the levels of interest rates and various other things. I'm not saying you can't, but it's just a lot harder.
It is.
And I think a lot of people in that world have moved to the, hey, look, you can, learn how to buy a business for £1 or no money down. And my view is you shouldn't be buying a business until you know how to run one successfully anyway.
Correct.
Because why would you want to learn on someone else's, frankly, retirement fund, which isn't fair on them? And secondly, if you buy a business you know nothing about because you've never been in the industry, your first 2 years are going to be you learning the industry.
Absolutely.
And it's going to cost you a fortune in all the mistakes you're going to make if you survive, frankly.
Yep.
Because I've seen too many people who bought businesses that way and they don't have the skill to survive 2 years learning on a £2 million business or a £3 million business.
No. They'd be far better off to go and work for one of those businesses for a couple of years.
100%.
Learn the ropes. And,
Or buy a small one. Buy a £250,000, £300,000 one. Run that for 2 or 3 years. Grow it to £500,000, and then go do acquisitions because you've learned without the high level of risk.
Yeah,
just don't really agree with that whole sort of. I'd rather buy a good business, make it better, than buy a turnaround. Turnarounds are brutally hard to do. I think people underestimate how hard they are to do.
Yeah.
And I've done one, and it is absolutely brutal.
Yep.
And it's not a fun experience at all.
No, it's not.
And you better like people being angry at you when you're doing it, because that's a large amount of what it revolves around.
Yep. A lot of people lose their jobs.
Yep.
And you're not popular, and you've got to make tough decisions.
And creditors, all this. It's just not a nice look. I like you. I want to run a business where I'm working with great customers, great suppliers. We get to enjoy it. I don't want to have to worry about somebody, banging on the door. Or, I've heard some horrible stories of people being threatened with all kinds of things. So, buyer beware, I think, would say about that. Okay, so step number 1, F in face is funding, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And go out and look at what's available. There are all sorts of different areas where you can raise funding. Banks, if you've got an established business, are still okay. The problem with banks, with the regulatory environment we're in now, is that basically they won't lend money to you unless you don't need it.
Yep.
But if
you're in a specific industry,
or if you're in a specific industry,
pre-approved, right?
And you got tangible assets that they can whack a charge on and things like that. But there are other providers of debt funding and of equity funding who will be interested in supporting M&A transactions.
Well, just walk us through that, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't even know the options that are available to them, right? So, like, what other options are there?
So there's debt funding, which is borrowing money from somebody. And the key issue that you've got with debt is you have to pay it back.
Yes.
And with interest, and it will often come with conditions that are called covenants that you have to comply with.
Yep.
And if you don't comply with those, then the loan goes into default, and then the interest rate's higher, and it'll hit your credit scores and things like that. So you've really got to manage that carefully and properly. But that's your debt funding. Like I say, you've got your high street banks. And then there's been a whole plethora of fintech lenders springing up. For your listeners that are in the UK, they'd be familiar with places like Funding Circle and
they're expensive.
They are expensive. They are expensive, but you can get they move quickly.
True.
The other key issue with those fintech ones is that you have to give them a personal guarantee, which means that you are on the line even if the business fails.
Yeah, we worked last year. We worked at Scale Up Summit. We worked with I'm going to remember the name in a minute, but we were with a funder where they actually didn't want the personal guarantees on it.
Yeah.
And they were less than Funding Circle, which was Plato. There you go, Plato. So if you haven't heard of Plato or come across Plato, check them out. They're very good at helping entrepreneurs with funding. Specifically, they're very good at short-term cash flow funding.
Right.
And they don't require, depending on the amount, but typically most people don't. They don't require a personal guarantee, which is obviously
amazing.
great.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Obviously, if somebody does require a personal guarantee, I think this is something I don't think gets talked about enough either, is that you can get an insurance policy to underwrite it.
You can.
Which most people don't know about. So they sign personal guarantees secured against assets like family, home and stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's a really high risk thing to do when you could insure the personal guarantee for probably 100, 150, something like that, pounds a month, and that will cover 80% of it at least. And again, it's this whole kind of, you don't know what you don't know stuff, and no one's telling you that. So it's like, well, okay, great. The price, there's that old quote that says, what's the price of education? It's way less than the price of ignorance, right?
Exactly.
Way less. But I think that whole kind of, if you're going to play this game, one of the first things you've got to do is get educated about what your options are.
About what your options are, exactly.
Yeah.
So you've got debt funding, which is where you're borrowing money and you have to pay it back. And then there's equity funding, which is where you are selling a stake in your company.
Yes.
So you are literally selling shares to other people who come in and own a slice of the business.
I'm so glad you said that, because I want to talk about that, because in the book you make a really, really good point, and I think it's a point that holds a lot of people back. And it's entrepreneurs fall into the trap of thinking, I've got to keep all my shares.
Correct.
Right. And I think, and I've seen it and I've felt it too at different times. But why do you think, where does that come from? Where does that belief come from that actually we've got to keep control of the whole thing? Where does it come from? Do you think?
I think it comes from a place of fear.
Okay.
More than anything.
Right.
Even though a lot of entrepreneurs won't admit that, but I think it is from a place of fear. If I don't have complete control, someone else might do something and it might all go horribly wrong. And I founded the business, so I should have all of it.
Right.
And my whole point is, bootstrapping is a very honorable and time-tested way of growing a business. And if you've got lots of cash to put into it, or you can generate lots of sales,
well, you got time.
Go for it.
Let's be honest. If you're not, if you're in your 30s and you got time, great.
Absolutely.
If you're in your 50s, no.
Correct. The beauty of having cash is it enables you to do things faster. And I was advising an insurance company a few years ago, and we had raised some funding for them, and we said, what do you need to grow into this market? And they said, well, we'd like to hire that person or that person or that person. And we said, okay, well, so let's go out and hire them. Oh no, we can't possibly afford them. What do you mean? We just raised £5 million. Of course you can afford them.
Yeah.
This is all about growing. It's changing the way you think. So many, and again, because of the constraints of bootstrapping, so many founders just kind of go, oh, well, we'll have to do it slowly. We've got to be cautious and careful. But if you've gone out and raised money to do something and the money's there, then do it.
Deploy the capital.
Yeah,
right?
deploy the capital. That's what it's there for. That's what investors put their money into companies for.
But just walk us through. I know it's in the book, but I thought I'd ask you just to walk us through, because I thought when I read it in the book, I was like, oh, that's really clever. Because I think where people get trapped in is the mindset of, I'm going to get diluted, right?
Yep.
Like I'm going to, I have 100% of the company. So when I sell in my head for 10 million, I get all 10 million,
yep.
right? And if I get diluted and I sell 20% of it, I'm basically going to give away 2 million at the end of it. I think that's the trap.
That is the trap. That is the trap. And I like to think about it in the context of a pie.
Right.
So you've got a pie and you own all of that pie. But by expanding the business, you grow the pie to be 10 times the size it is.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, your 80% stake or 50% stake or whatever size stake, instead of you getting all of a 10 million pound company, you've got half of a 100 million pound company. Well, you're 5 times better off.
Yeah. But I don't think people do the math. I genuinely don't think people do that.
That's why I set out that example in the book. So I said, imagine you're the founder of a tech company and you've grown it up to be worth 3 million and you need more cash to scale. You get an investor who puts in 2 million. Now, all of a sudden, you as the founder own 60%, your investor owns 40%. Next stop, you hire a really hotshot CTO to come in and do all the tech based on the strategy that you've delivered and that your investor has backed you up on. And as part of the package, that CTO gets options over 5% of the company. So your 60% stake now drops down to 57. Your investor's 40% stake drops to 38, and the chief technology officer has 5. And now you scale this thing. So when you had it, it was worth 3.
Yep.
When you added the investment, you had it of 2. That made it worth 5. You own 60%, which is still 3. But now through executing that strategy, you've turned that 5 million into 50 million.
Yeah.
And your 57% stake of 50 million is like 28 million.
Yeah.
So you're way better off. Everyone is better off.
Well, that's the point, actually, isn't it? Everybody is better off. Investors.
Because if the pie gets bigger, everybody's better off.
Well, the other discipline I think of going to raise money is it forces you to really solidify what your strategy is, because you've got to build a pitch deck.
You do.
You've got to talk to investors. You have to know your numbers. You've got to be on top of all that element of the business. You've got to be really clear that there is a robust, scalable opportunity here, because actually there might not be.
Yep.
You might think there is, but you sit down and put it in front of 3 or 4 investors, and they're going to pick holes in it.
Yeah.
You're going to find out really quickly whether what you've got is scalable or not.
Absolutely.
That's massively valuable. Anyway, don't underestimate the value in doing that as an exercise. Point number 1. But point number 2 is, I always say to people, if you're going to go raise money, think about what else you want on top of the money. So from an investor, what do you want? Do you want an investor who's going to sit on a board and give you operational excellence? Do you want an investor who's got great networks that's going to plug you into new networks? Do you want an investor who's going to bring customers to you because he's got X customers that he knows that he can move across? Like, what other value will that investor bring to the table that isn't just cash?
Correct.
Because just shopping for cash is a fairly linear way of looking at that as a process, and you're missing out on a huge amount of value.
You are. Absolutely. But again, some founders find it really hard to all of a sudden What do you mean you're going to sit on my board and you're going to question my decisions and you're going to challenge me and all
But that's
that?
being a grown-up, though, isn't it? You know, there's a reason.
It
There's
is.
a reason why I talk about being a grown-up.
But still, a lot of them really struggle with that.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen that in so many examples.
But then you should sell. Then okay, so my point would be, if you're going to struggle with that, then you should just sell a majority stake in the business, become a minority shareholder, and go do something else. Sit on the board as an advisor, and take a bunch of money off the table and go do something else. There's no, if you want to go on there, there's a reason why I talk about having a grown-up business, because it's as much about the identity and the mindset of, I'm running this business because I wanted to run without me, grow without me, and create shareholder value that somebody would pay for, right?
Yep.
That's the way my definition. You can be a teenage business at 20 million having a tantrum, right? Look, Noel's going to tell me what to do. It's like, what's fine. If you choose that, if freedom is more important, if the choice you want is control and freedom, the thing you will give up is the chance of exit and and financial freedom and freedom to do what you want, when you want, however you want.
Yeah.
You have to choose which freedom is most important to you.
Correct.
Right? But short term, there will be a need to give up one type of freedom to get the other type of freedom.
Yes.
And I think, and I've struggled with that in my career, right? I've had businesses where I was absolutely, my team very amazingly tolerant of me, that I was a control freak about certain stuff at certain times. And it really took a long time for me to go, unless I'm prepared to just let go of that need to have that visibility and like be free to do what I went on Tuesday afternoon, unless I was prepared to go, look, actually I'm okay with having my diary much more structured, run by somebody else, organized by somebody else, because it optimizes my performance, which means we get to where we want to go faster. But but that means I just can't, go to the gym at 2 on a Friday because I would 2 on a Thursday because I feel like it. But no, if I'm going to do that, it's got to be scheduled in my diary so everyone knows.
Exactly.
You have to give up. I think you have to give up one type of freedom to get the next type.
Yes.
And I think
agreed.
A lot of entrepreneurs don't understand it's a trade you make in the short term to get the longer term payoff.
Correct.
Right. And the crazy thing is, the quicker you realize that, the faster you actually get back way more freedom, because you have the freedom to think, you have the freedom not to worry about stuff because people are doing things, getting stuff achieved. You actually get a different type of freedom back, which is it's a mental freedom.
You do.
Okay.
You do.
Any other funding sources we haven't touched on?
I mean, debt and equity. The other source is grants. Grants are available. They're increasingly competitive because the benefit of grants is you don't have to pay them back, and you don't have to dilute any equity stakes, and just sell more.
Yeah. Well, I'll share one other then that maybe one of my clients is used to buy 2 7-figure businesses.
Okay.
Which is really clever. They went to their suppliers, their biggest suppliers, and asked their suppliers to loan them the money to buy the business.
Okay, well, it's a loan.
Yeah, but
still debt. But
a loan against. Yeah, okay, it's still debt. Fair point. But a loan against future business that they would give them as a result of buying that business.
Buying that business. Yeah.
So, that funded two deals.
I think that's a really clever approach.
And there was no interest on it either. That was the main thing. So they lent them the money. They got another customer. So for them, it was a win. And then, they didn't pay any interest on it either.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, that's really smart, because find someone else who benefits from you buying the business. And then actually they're essentially a joint venture partner, aren't they? You're really bringing them in as a bit of a joint venture partner.
But an interesting one that we could throw in there is what about going out and acquiring one of your suppliers?
You could do that for sure.
Do that, and then all of a sudden you've got control over a supply chain, and you can squeeze things and make it harder for some of your competitors.
Definitely.
So again, in the book, I set out kind of the approach. How do you find these companies?
Yep.
And once you've got an idea of what you want to look for, in a lot of cases when people are starting out, I say, well, is there a competitor that you can buy?
Yeah.
That's kind of the easiest and obvious one. Or is there something that's complementary to your business, that is aligned to it, where you're not going to buy something and you're both targeting the same customers, kind of thing. So identify what it is you're trying to do.
Or supply chain. Would you look at supply chain?
You could look at supply chain. The other one for physical based businesses, you could look at I'll buy something in the next town.
Expand geographical
I'm working
reach.
with a client right now in Italy that's buying a chain of 7 pizzerias. So they've already got some restaurant stuff, and now they want to expand. And this guy wants to sell his chain of 7 pizzerias, and they're going in to buy that and expand into new territory.
That makes sense. Yeah, so sort of extend the locational footprint.
Exactly. Okay. Exactly. So there are multiple different routes, and then people then say, oh well, how do you approach them? Well, pick up the phone and give them a call. Reach out to them, send them a letter, send them an email, say, hey, this is me. I'd love to have a chat.
Or a LinkedIn request. I find
a LinkedIn request is often really good. But, there are so many ways that you can reach out and connect with people now. And you've got to just initiate the conversation and start it. And you call them up and say, look, this is who I am. This is my philosophy. This is what we're doing. I've identified your business as something that I'd really be interested in acquiring. Can we have a conversation? And I always really emphasize it with people here, build a human connection, right? Because if
you got to put time in,
exactly. Right? And particularly if you're buying a business from someone for whom it's been their life.
Yeah.
And all of the employees are kind of like family and all of that. And it's going to be a massive, massive wrench for them. It's like, okay, well, yeah, I am ready to sell my business, but I'm really concerned about who I'm selling it to and, what's going to happen. And are they going to come in and asset strip and fire all the employees? And, that's not going to work.
Really genuine concerns. That's
very genuine concerns.
Because that is done by quite a lot of people. And some people do approach it that way.
Correct.
Which is why I always think the most important thing is a values fit, isn't it? So it's a client of mine recently bought a business, actually in the last couple of months, and he was outbid by other people, but the owner went with him because of his values fit. And actually what was interesting is that I talked with the client and we discussed, actually, why don't you bring the seller to your existing business?
Yeah.
Let him walk around, let him meet the people, let him see the culture that you've got, let him feel and experience it.
Yes.
So that he could go, yeah, this is what I want from my people. Because I think if you're selling a business, I think one of the biggest concerns is not, it's not just the money you're going to make, but it's actually the people, especially if they've been with you a long time.
Yeah. It's
like, what are you going to do with the people? Are you going to look after them? Are you going to treat them decently? Are you going to, or are you just going to bring them in and, destroy all the relationships I built? And I think a lot of owners fear that more than anything else.
Yeah.
And it was just really interesting because he ended up, getting the deal, which is great. But the reason that he went with him is because he just felt values fit on a really high level, and it was less about the money. It still needed to be, within 5 or 10% of where the market was at, but it was significantly less than what a corporate was offering him.
Right.
But he was just like, they'll come in and decimate the culture,
exactly.
and I don't want to do that. I know.
Once you hit a certain level, money becomes a hygiene factor.
Yeah.
Not a deciding factor. It's like, okay, fine. So yeah, sure, I'd love this, but I'll be fine with this as well.
Well, I see Joe Rogan says it's like, once you get to the stage that you can walk into a restaurant and never worry about the price of anything you're eating, you've got enough money.
Yeah.
Which I like as a kind of, I thought was quite nice.
Yep. That's a good one.
Okay, so what's up? So then we go C.
So then we go C, which is consolidate. And that is where every M&A transaction either succeeds or falls over.
Okay,
because it's all about how you put two companies together.
Right.
So, and you might choose not to put them together. You might choose to just leave them as standalone. But in a lot of deals where I've seen where you're expanding geographically and you're trying to create something that's consistent across a wider group, the approach that you take in that C is for consolidate phase is all about, how do you bring these new people in? If you're acquiring a competitor and you've been, at each other's throats for years and years and years, all of a sudden it's like, hey, we're all good,
Awkward.
best friends. So, you've really got to plan that out. And one of the key things that I often advise clients on, and I had this experience when I was doing my deals in PLC world, is can you find people in the management team of the business that you're buying that you can bring into your management team? So all of the people in that company see, oh, Joe from our team, he's now part of the overall team. Okay, it must be okay then. It's not like they're going to come in and just take us over. And there's often, not necessarily having the owner involved, the former owner involved, because that can create problems, but having the next level down of management involved, if they're good, bring them in and get them involved in your business, because they'll bring a fresh perspective to you and your business as well, and they will help bring the rest of the team along.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to, so when I coach clients through acquisitions, there's sort of 3 stages that we kind of go through. So number 1 is just evaluate. Don't do a lot for the first 60 days, probably. Just evaluate everything about the business. Just let it run.
Yep.
Look at it, go, well, there's an opportunity there, there's an opportunity here. Make a list, make a project plan of just evaluate everything, right? So phase 1 being evaluate. Phase 2 is really kind of understand. And what I mean by that is understand the people, right? The majority of the value in the business is the people.
Absolutely.
I'm a massive fan of profiling, as many of the podcast listeners will know. but I'm a big believer that you go into the team after a couple of months and say, right, listen, we really want to make sure that we're investing in you. We've got the right people in the right roles. We want to understand your skill sets. And then that's when you deploy profiles. You don't do it initially because you'll scare people, but you do it a couple of months in, and then you say, right, we'd like to profile everybody so we can better understand you. So that they see that as an investment and some training, and you get a massive amount of data very quickly about who's on the team and what have you got, what could you change, who's got the capability, who's got the hunger to kind of go on the journey with you. And then I think you do that kind of like evaluate, understand, then execute, change. Then you go, right, okay, it's 90 days. We've done the 90-day piece. Now we can start to implement changes and execute the next phase of the plan. But I think the danger is you go in and start changing stuff without understanding what's working, what's not, or worse, you change 3 or 4 things all at once. And then if you break it, you don't know which one of the 3 or 4 things broke it. Or if you change 3 things, 4 things, and it blows up, you're like, I don't know which one did that. And again, it's that, look, change one thing at a time, test, measure, collect data, analyze, go again. But I think that whole kind of first 90 days, you just need the mindset of, look, I've got to understand how this thing works, identify all the systems and process opportunities that could really help everything, understand the people, create the next plan, and then at the end of 90 days go, right, look, here's my findings. And I'm a big believer in helping clients go in and have a team, team day when we go, right, let's just share what we've been learning about the business from our perspective. Share the vision of where we see we can go with this now and how you guys will fit.
And you can do some of that work before the deal completes when the due diligence process is going.
Of course, yeah, of course.
Because you've got your lawyers and your accountants going in crawling all over the books, but you can sit down with your team and maybe 1 or 2 members of the company that you're acquiring.
That's a good
idea. And start pulling that planning together and start saying, well, hey, this is what we're looking at doing. What do you guys think?
Yeah, great idea.
That due diligence phase.
How long does it typically last, though?
I mean, in a decent sized deal, 30 to 60 days elapsed time. So, you've got the time for that to go on. I mean, the bigger the deal, the more complex it gets. But I mean, I was involved in the sale of a PR agency in October, and the due diligence probably took 6 weeks. It was a business that was turning over $5 million.
Wow, that's it. Yeah, that feels fast, I have to say, compared to some of the other ones I've seen, but that does feel quite fast.
Well, it was pretty intense. I mean, and this PR agency was acquired by a very large private equity-backed business that has completed 200 M&A transactions in the last 5 years.
Right.
So they have an M&A machine going on.
Yeah, they have a whole team.
They've got a whole team, and that's what they do. And they've got accountancy advisors outsourced but pretty well on tap, and legal advisors outsourced but pretty well on tap. And heads of terms are signed. Right, due diligence kicks off on Monday.
Off we go.
Here are the checklists. Get it all ready, boys.
Yeah. Well, I think actually there's a really good point here, which is if you're going to play this game and use this strategy, I think you want to think about building a deal team.
Oh, 100%.
So the two clients of mine that have really aggressively grown, buying £1 million, £2 million businesses in their sectors and spaces. They've done it because they've built deal teams. So they've built 2 or 3. They've got 2 or 3 people full time who are either analyzing deals, looking at deals, and then onboarding those deals when they go through. And therefore, they've built a team to do that. I think one of the mistakes I've seen people make is trying to foster that work onto the existing team who are just responsible for running the existing business and think, well, I'll just give it to them to do it as well. And I'm like, hang on a second, this is a really specialized skill set.
It is.
To be able to understand deals, analyze deals, go through that. And it's not their full-time job, and it should be. If you're going to start making investments and buying 2, 3, 4 million, £1 million businesses, that's a significant investment. If you're not comfortable investing in the people to do that, you shouldn't do the strategy, is my point. I think you shouldn't do the strategy if you're not prepared to invest in the people to build that. Because otherwise you just spend your life, you'll get sucked into all of those boxes rather than actually your box should be looking at the next deal flow and talking to the next person and finding the next thing, right?
I mean, my job at Huvo, the one that's the big case study in the book, I mean, I was the CFO of the company, so I was responsible for that. But in each of the divisions we had, I had strong finance people, and I knew that they were good on the day-to-day.
Yeah.
I had a strong financial controller in the team who kind of dealt with all of the coordination so that when it was time for the monthly board meeting, I was fully briefed and knew what was going on. But I would say 80% of my time was spent on running deals.
Yeah.
And that's what I do with my clients now. I run the deals for them.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, I've got a client of mine who's what are we on, 18 million this year. and literally he just finds the deal, wins the deal, smooth, gets the deal over the line, and then hands it to the team who then run it, implement it, and he just goes off and does the next one.
That's what I do with Dan.
Yeah, but again, point here that's worth reminding people is he had been running that business successfully for 10 to 12 years before he even looked at M&A.
Yes.
So he knew that business inside and out. He knew exactly where all the numbers were. Just on the due diligence piece before we kind of move on, what are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen people make during due diligence? Number one, not doing it very well.
Number one, not doing it very well. Yeah, wow. I've seen that one. In a big way. I actually saw that in a public company that acquired another business, and they didn't do their due diligence, and the whole deal blew up. And when you're a public company, you have to report these things.
Yeah.
And it ended up being really, really embarrassing. Really, really embarrassing. But no, that was kind of a one-off. But no, one of the biggest and hardest things is if something comes up in due diligence that causes you to think, I'm not sure I want to do this deal. It's really tough because you're into deal fever now, and you've worked so hard on it.
Sunk cost fallacy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But if something comes up in the diligence, the first step you do is you go back to the seller and say, look, this has come up in the due diligence. This never entered into our discussions. We're going to adjust the purchase price because of this.
I think people feel uncomfortable about doing that, right? They feel uncomfortable about going back and saying we need to adjust it. I agree. I'm just saying it. I think people go, oh, well, that's the price. I feel uncomfortable now going back and saying, well, basically, you didn't tell me the truth about what's.
And that's something I always advise people when I'm advising them on an exit is, okay, what are the skeletons in the closet? Because every business has them.
True.
What are they? And at what point do we disclose that to the buyer? Because by the time you get to due diligence and they're spending tens or hundreds of thousands on their accountants and lawyers coming in and crawling all over it, you don't want the accountants and lawyers finding it because that will destroy credibility. So my advice is always, just do it gradually. Don't open up the conversation by saying, by the way, we've got this big problem. But before you sign heads of terms, between the principals, there shouldn't be any secrets.
Isn't that trust thing?
Total trust thing.
It's like, you don't want to be the kind of person that sells your business to somebody and they find out they bought a pup afterwards, right?
And then you fight over warranty claims and all of that,
right? Like, but I think there's an important thing here, which is if you're thinking of selling a business in the next, say, 1, 2, 3 years, this is why I kind of really love some of the entrepreneurs I get to work with, because we get them exit ready. Yeah, a large part of what I do now is help entrepreneurs who want to scale the sales and put the teams in place and get all that stuff sorted out. So by the time they go to market and they actually talk to a potential acquirer, they've got really good systems, really good team. That bit's already been done.
All the contracts are in place.
HR policies,
nice steady growth projections, and all of that stuff. Yeah, no, grooming a business for sale is an important step to go down, because otherwise, if again, it comes back to your comment about, entrepreneurs think they can just run their business and one day someone will come along and, offer them 20 million for it.
Because that happens like all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Not.
Lots of them think it does. And the reality is a long, long way away. And it can be a rude awakening when all of a sudden you're thinking, okay, great, I'm ready to sell. And you take it out to market and nobody offers you what you wanted or anything like that.
Or you get promised. I think the other thing that causes issues is you get promised a massive fee by an agent, and then the reality is it's never valued to that.
Yeah.
Which I think is creates an interesting kind of warped perception of the value. Well, the other one I think catches people out too is that they equate value to time. So like, I've been in the business 20 years, I deserve to get paid for the 20 years. I was like, hang on a second, if you were taking out 6-figure salary for 20 years, you were getting paid then.
You're getting paid, yeah.
And by the way, you're paid on the value of the asset, not on the time you've put into it.
Correct.
Which is, I think, where a lot of people get caught out with that. They're going, well, I put 20 years in it, I deserve to get paid for 20 years. Yeah, but if the last 10 years have basically been the same year repeating itself, you basically only created 10 years worth of value. The rest of it was just keeping it going.
Yep.
And I think that's a hard pill for a lot of entrepreneurs to swallow when they go, what do you mean the last 10 years I haven't really created any value? No, you haven't actually. It's like, and then they get cross about it. And it's like, well, rather than get cross about it, maybe you should just realize, and hopefully this, in conversations like this, podcasts like this, help people realize that building value, there are a specific number of building blocks that go into that, and you can learn what they are, and you can then start to strategically build it with that intention.
Yep.
But it comes back to that point you talked earlier about at the very beginning of everything is like, get the mindset right. Are you running the business or growing the business? Because you've got to get really clear which one you are. There's nothing wrong with that, and there's no judgment either way. 100%. If you want to run it and make a really great lifestyle business and have a ton of money and a ton of fun, and that's your model, and then invest that cash elsewhere, you go for it and love it. Brilliant and awesome and fair play to you and all power to you, right? But if you want to create a exit event, then you need to understand the risks in that, understand all the things you're going to need to learn about doing that are not running the business. They're just not.
Yeah.
And I think too many people think I can just run my business, literally rock up. And always, I think the analogy I use with people is that most people sell it like they think they're selling a car. Because it actually, and the reason I use that analogy is most people will only probably ever sell one business in their whole life, which is the one they'll be running. So whereas they'll sell their house 7 or 8 times. So they kind of understand how that one works. They understand how selling a car works because they had loads of them or whatever. And you go, well, actually, the reason you're struggling with selling your business is because it's the only deal you'll probably ever do.
Right.
If you're on your 3rd or 4th deal, you'll go, look, I understand the process now. I don't get emotional about it. If it is your only deal, then your paradigm is, this has to be the best deal I can get because I only get one.
Yeah.
That paradigm alone creates a fear and scarcity at the very going into the whole thing anyway, right?
It does. Yeah.
So let's talk about E. The E in your face is
is exit.
Right. Okay.
And as I put it, if you've been through these stages, if you've acquired companies, then you know what the exit process is like, because you're just sitting on the other side of the table.
True.
And the key things there, as I said, are about preparing the exit, preparing the business for sale.
Yeah.
And I always say to people, look, if you're serious about selling your company, it's going to take you 3 years to prepare the business to maximize your price.
Really?
Yeah. You want to be able to demonstrate 3 years of growing financials. You want to make sure, as we said, all your supplier contracts are in place, all your customer contracts are in place, all your employment contracts are in place, and up to date with the latest legislation that's going on. You want to make sure everything's documented. You want to make sure your IP is protected. There's a whole bunch of stuff, like the plumbing, if you will. There's a whole bunch of stuff that just needs to be done.
Yep.
And if you do it and get it right, it could mean that the business valuation goes from being 5 times earnings to being 8 times earnings.
Yeah.
And that multiple can be huge.
Yeah.
And people don't often think about that. And they oh God, another 3 years. But, yes, invest another 3 years, do all of these things, do them strategically, do them with focus. And instead of selling your business for 10 million, you're going to sell it for 18 million.
Yeah. But again, I think it's a great point. But the reason most people they don't even think, so they'll then quibble about the investments, right? Oh, you got to get all new HR contracts done. Well, that's going to cost us, thousands. Why should we do that? It's like, you don't have to do that. But
no,
I understand at the end when you get an offer, the offer they get is going to be a heck of a lot less.
Exactly.
And you're going to look at it and go, it was really cheap money to have made that investment.
Exactly.
But again, I come back to the point, I think so many people are so busy just running the business, they don't sit down with professionals like you, like me, and go, okay, great. If I want this outcome, this number, there's a whole other conversation. Most people don't even know the number they need, right? Which is a separate thing altogether. But like, if I want to sell for this, what does it need to look and feel like and perform like to be worth that, right? Like if I'm going to sell my house for, 100 grand more than it is right now, and you ask an estate agent to come in and they'd tell you what you need to fix the windows, you need to paint this, you need to sort the plumbing out, the roof needs doing. They would tell you that.
Yes.
But I think most people get to the point of just being mentally and physically exhausted with the business and go, I'll just sell it now. I just want out.
Yep.
Rather than going, hang on a second, I've got 2 to 3 years to set this up for an exit. I need to get some advice. I need to get the estate agent round equivalent to come and look at everything and tell me that needs fixing. That's not good. You're missing out with AI processes here.
Yep.
Your contract's stuck over here. You've got 35% or 40. I had one the other day when I was speaking to a client, 45% of the revenue with one company.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And like, that's
huge
a massive risk. Yeah. And also if the company decides to go out to tender during your due diligence phase, that's going to scupper the whole deal. So I think with all of this, it's about better to get forewarned and forearmed, and then you'll make smarter decisions because you'll understand the landscape. And I think too many entrepreneurs don't understand the game they're trying to play and then get frustrated when it doesn't work out the way they want it. And it's like, well,
it's a different game.
It's a totally different game
running their business. Yeah.
And I think if nothing else, hopefully this conversation gets people to sit down and think, okay, in 3 years' time, where do I really want to be? And how far, like here's something that really blows my mind when I do seminars and like Scale Up Summit. We do Scale Up Summit once a year for 2 days where we talk in depth about topics like this to entrepreneurs. And one of the questions I'll often ask is, how many of you have had your business professionally valued in the last 12 months? Put your hands up if you have.
Yeah.
And like, it's a tiny percentage, maybe 5%, maybe 10 at the most.
Yep.
Which means there's 90% of the people in that room have no idea the value of the asset they are working in every single day. And I'm like at the very minimum, you should do it at least every year, right? When your P&L, when your end of year tax statement comes in from your accountant, you should be saying, great, can I pay you a little bit extra to give me a realistic market valuation on this? Just to baseline it. And I think if you just do that, you're going to go, okay, like if I spent a whole year and the value of my business hasn't moved, then whatever I did in the last year, I can't repeat.
Yeah.
Because then it's not going to move either, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I think because people don't stop to just take score. If you think about sports teams, it's like there's a forced half time, isn't there?
Yeah.
In a game where you go, right, or there's a quarter break. If,
Absolutely.
like you
and
have
then after the game's over, they go back and they watch the video
they watch the tape and they look at it and go, what did we do good? What did we do badly? Right. And they have coaches for a reason, because the coaches can see things on a pitch that they can't see if they're playing the game.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think the more you kind of just go, look, we need to have a forced kind of period where you just, the end of the year, right, take a couple of days, sit down, look at the numbers, get advice, have coaches look at your last year's performance, tell you how you can improve it. If you approach running a business with that mindset, like it's a game, you would keep score.
Yeah.
Because how do you know if you're winning if you don't?
Yep.
Absolutely. How do you know if you're winning?
Absolutely. And what are your competitors doing?
Yeah, very good point.
Just kind of, just keep an awareness of what's going on in the industry.
Yeah.
Cool.
No, I think it's been really, really great. Love the whole kind of framework and the methodology. And if there's one kind of final thought you want to leave people with, that obviously I love the whole add then multiply. I just thought it was such a great title. Add a business then multiply the value. Just love that whole concept. Quite a lot of leverage in there as well, which is why I think I resonated with it, because it is a powerful leverage strategy.
Yeah,
for sure, without question. But like for you, what's the key kind of message you want to give to people who are listening to this kind of conversation, this about like the 10x thinking, and what's one or two things they could do right now that would really kind of get them into the right headspace to even play this game?
Well, number one, read the book.
Read the book. Link in the comments below. Yeah.
Awesome. No, I mean, reach out, talk to me, talk to other people. Reach out to your accountant, ask them what your external accountant. Some of them will know, some of them won't.
Yeah, well, I'm going to jump in here because, right, if you're going to talk to your external accountant, there is a really important thing first. Number one, ask them if they've ever done any M&A stuff.
Yes.
Because most of them haven't.
Right.
At all.
No, 100%. 100%. Yes.
So if they say, no, I've never done any M&A, number one, don't ask them. Number two, you might want another accountant if you're planning on doing that strategy. Because otherwise, they're learning on your money.
Correct.
Point number one. And point number two is, if they've never done it before,
they can't.
They'll mess it up too, 9 times out of 10, because they don't know what they don't know.
Exactly.
Same point.
Exactly.
So like, if you're doing M&A or you want to do M&A and it's you want to scale through acquisition, you absolutely 100% need an accountant who understands that world.
You need an accountant who understands that world. You need a lawyer who understands that world, because the documentation is comprehensive.
Yes.
I mean, in this example, the PR agency that we sold, the sale and purchase agreement was 110 pages.
Wow.
That's a big fat document.
And budget for lawyer fees, because they're usually bigger than you think.
Yeah.
Usually.
Yeah, they often are.
Without question.
Yeah. I have a special arrangement with a retired, not quite magic circle, but top 10 law firm partner that I've worked with for over 20 years.
See, it's all who you know, though, right? It comes back to, we were talking before about the power of the network, and it's like, who's in your network? And that's the other thing I would say. If you want to do, it was interesting. I had a conversation with somebody who messaged me on LinkedIn and said, I'm doing M&A work, I'm doing acquisitions and scaling, but I'm not in a mastermind or a group with anybody else who's doing that kind of thing, so I feel a bit isolated. Can we have a chat? And I said, yeah, sure. And obviously I walked them through the CEO boardroom that we have, where 80% of the people in that room are doing that. They're all running very successful business anyway, but they're then scaling using acquisitions.
Right.
And he was just like, I need to be in a room like that right now, because I've got nobody else to talk to about this stuff. And
sure. Yeah.
if I talk to people, I can't talk to anybody else in my team about it, because they don't don't understand it.
Yep.
And secondly, all the things that I'm talking about, deal structure or funding options or stuff like that, there are very few people I can talk to.
Correct.
In a safe environment, which is, one of the things that's so cool about having a boardroom like that, now that we've got a boardroom with that many people that are using this kind of tools. I don't know, obviously you're going to get a chance to speak to some as well, which I'm looking forward to. So yeah, sorry, I derailed you a little bit with the accountancy.
But you were absolutely right. I was going to come on to that, but you were absolutely right. So yes, get professional advisors who've done this before.
Power team. I talk about power team, right? Like you've got to level up your power team at the end of, if you're going to go on this journey, it's great having a business coach, but if you have a business coach who's helped other people do M&A stuff, we're going to have a better insight on it than just a standard business coach, right? Yep. Be careful who you go on this journey with, because there are a lot of people telling you how to do stuff they've never done.
Yep.
I for me is a massively important point to make sure everyone understands, right?
So you got your external team, then you want to look at your internal team, because this is going to be time consuming.
Good point.
Whether you're buying or selling, it's going to be time consuming. So the way I look at it, my metaphor for this is, think about a three-legged stool.
Yes.
If you got a three-legged stool and all three legs are strong, it's stable.
Yeah.
And if they're not all strong, it falls over. And every business has three legs. They need to find and win customers. That's called sales and marketing.
Yep.
They need to deliver whatever it is they do to customers. That's called operations. And they need to manage money coming in and going out, and that's called finance. You need to have in your team very strong people leading strong departments. And, when you're small, you don't need to bring them in full-time. You can hire them fractional, but as your business grows, you want to bring them in full-time. And you want to make sure that when you're away, down in the lawyer's office at 2:00 in the morning, and it still happens, negotiating bits and pieces on a deal, that your team is back at the ranch looking after everything, and you don't have to worry about it.
100%. The investing in good people is something that always pays back 10 times. Yep, 10 times. Listen, David, thank you so much for the conversation. Really appreciate it. I think you dropped some absolute nuggets. We'll drop a link to your LinkedIn profile below as well, so people can connect with you, follow you on LinkedIn, and obviously the opportunity to get a copy of the book completely free of charge for Add Then Multiply, which is brilliant. So you can get a copy of this book by David B. Horne if you go to the link below the show notes on this. Thank you so much for joining us, taking us through how the fund, acquire, consolidate, exit process. Love it. And we're off to have lunch, so enjoy yourself. Take care. We'll see you on the next show.
Cheerio.
Bye for now. That concludes this episode of the Grown Up Business Podcast. I hope that got you fired up and ready to grow. The key thing, though, is to remember you get paid on what you get done. So write down the top 3 actions from the show and make sure that you implement those in the next 72 hours. Hey, and while you're at it, make sure you click the links and the resources below this episode to claim free growth resources to help you build the business you desire and deserve. I'll see you on the next episode.